Right. We thought we were going to have to play musical chairs there for a second. But let's go ahead and kick off our panel on education. I want to introduce our moderator today. She is a Stephen F. Austin State University triple threat, having received her undergraduate, master's, and Doctor of Education here from SFA. She currently serves, and Audrey Young is with us. She is currently serves on the State Board of Education. We have, interesting enough, in our part of the world, Audrey lives just across the line in Trinity County, serving SBOE District 8. And then also we have Kevin Ellis in Lufkin. So we really have good, solid representation on the State Board of Education. The House members here, we represent about 190,000 under the new census in our districts. Audrey represents 1.7 million in that SBOE district. But she has served in public education as a speech therapist. She served on the school board at Apple Springs. She's been a master trustee. She serves on the TASB Legislative Advisory Council. Has a wealth of information and knowledge in this subject. So she seemed like a perfect fit for us. And having a lumberjack back home seemed like a great idea. We were honored to have her agree to be our moderator. So please join me in welcoming Audrey Young to moderate our education panel.
He left the part out that I'm a ninth generation to reside here in the state of Texas, and that my family member was on the first legislation for the state of Texas. So here I am 175 years later, also representing the state of Texas as well. So I'm quite proud of that. And Accent Jack. So thank y'all for being here today. I hope you had the opportunity to study in advance. Everybody did their homework, yes? Okay, look at them looking blankly. I feel like a middle school teacher now.
Are we going to get graded on this?
You might at the end. Thank you so much for being with us. The list of the panelists is listed above, and I'm going to go ahead and start with our questions, but I definitely want to thank everyone for being here today, and especially all of you who are willing to answer these questions about higher education, affordability, and affluence. So recently, question number one, and I'm going to go ahead and start with Huberty, please. Recently, Governor Greg Abbott and the Texas Education Agency announced that public school districts may not lose funding because of low attendance rates caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Why is this flexibility important when it comes to funding and attendance at our public schools?
Well, thank you, and thank you for having us here in Nacogdoches. It's beautiful. Appreciate it being here today. So it's interesting. The genesis of this really started, and Chairman Taylor knows this. During the pandemic, when we didn't go back to school and we started school in 2020, that we recognized we first started with the first. I want to say it was 12 weeks. Providing a hold harmless for school districts. At that time, we didn't know if kids, what kids were enrolling or if they were enrolled, if they were going to show up, and a variety of different things. So that was 2020, and then we finished the year by providing a hold harmless for the whole year. And basing it on not necessarily what enrollment was, but what we had budgeted and what we had put into the budget for really what did 2019 look like. Fast forward to this school year, and there was a kind of an abnormal thing that happened. I don't know if it's abnormal, but you had some districts actually lost enrollment. So it wasn't necessarily the kids weren't showing up, it's just the kids weren't enrolled in the school in and of itself. And then you had on top of that the average daily attendance, and you had situations where in some cases 15% of the kids weren't showing up for school. Now, in a normal level, when they look at their budgets, school districts are budgeting somewhere around 90, depending on the district, 93 to 95%. The average in 2019 was 95.4%. And so what happened is that if districts are having 5-10% less of the students' population showing up, it's hundreds of millions of dollars that is missing out of their budgets. And so the Chairman Dutton and the Public Education Committee wrote a letter to TEA, the governor, and speaker, and lieutenant governor, and basically laid out our position, at least our position. I know Chairman Taylor had also done the same thing, that said, look, we believe that we need to provide hold harmless for these school districts. We need to do it for the rest of this year. They're graded in 6-week periods, so it's the 6-week periods, and make it based upon a hold harmless on the average daily attendance. So what they came up with, though, is the 4 6 weeks, the 5th and 6th weeks, basically, which is where we're in now, because COVID's declined. We believe that we need to go find these kids. We need to figure out where these kids are at and register them. So there's got to have a little bit of a cross balance as you go forward. But the big issue is that recognizing that average daily attendance is how you get funded. And just in the scheme of things of how you look at this, it's about $550 million roughly that's going to go back to the school systems right now. And our argument was very simple. If you take the money away from them, the money that we provided for ESSER and all these other resources and the tutoring programs and everything else, if you make that up out of their regular budget, then that's less money that's going to go to help those kids that need the remediation right now. And so that is going to be something that we're going to talk about and look at during the interim, and is there a better way to do this? And I think there is, but that's the genesis of it.
Thank you. Any other panelists like to jump in?
Well, let me say thanks for inviting us here in Nacogdoches. I learned I think the thing I've learned most is how to spell Nacogdoches. I'd been leaving out the G, so now I know better. I agree with everything Dan has said. The problem for us is trying to adequately fund public education, and school districts generally budget around a certain number of kids, as Dan has said. We pay on the basis of average daily attendance. And this pandemic, what it caused was, particularly in the lower grades, we saw a number of children that were just absent from the whole system. Part of that was due, I think, to the fact that parents were not going to work so they could keep them at home. And they stayed home. And so as a consequence, they didn't show up in our schools, and as a consequence, though, it simply required us to do what Dan has talked about, hold harmless, to fully fund public education, even though these kids were not at school. But we need to also incentivize school districts to go out and find these kids, too. Don't sit there and let the kids be absent and just hope they came back. Many school districts, I know the one in Houston, they started an active campaign of going out, almost knocking on doors and going door to door, trying to get students come back. But that's essentially what this is all about.
I would just add one thing. Part of the reason for the continued lack of enrollment, ADA attendance, is because of the COVID guidelines that were in place. If a child tested positive, they were required to stay away for 10 days. Well, most of you know the Omicron variant. I had the overnight version myself, but now you had kids that were not allowed to go to school for 10 days. Teachers and all that were allowed to go back in 5. So part of the reason we're doing this is to make up for some of those things that were done at the time based on decisions and things passed down by CDC, but those have since been changed. But those caused some of those enrollment. And I think the average overall statewide is about 2.5% low. And for a state that's been growing every year for many, many years, that's quite a shock to the system. I think the number is more close to $1.2 billion, what this means for our local ISDs to do this. Fortunately for us, Texas economy is doing well. It's done well since session. It actually did well in the middle of session. It just kept getting better. So we do have those additional funds to do that. The Legislative Budget Board is able to move those around and meet the needs of the state when we're not in session and make sure we take care of that. The whole point of what we did, House Bill 3 and all this, is make sure we get our kids a great opportunity for an education. And we can't let something like COVID come along. It has interrupted it, but we can't allow it to destroy what we've done. So it's very important we keep these things going. Thank you. And I also want to thank you for allowing us to come back to Nacogdoches again. I've always enjoyed coming here. I'm sorry it's been 4 years since we were here, but it's good to be back. Thank you.
Gentlemen, VanDeaver?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for allowing us to be here. And I want to say thank you to the chairman, the 3 chairmen on the end, and the governor who has made this possible. Because as a former superintendent, I know what it's like to try to build a budget around a revenue stream that you don't know whether it's coming or not. And so I think our schools are looking for consistency, looking for dependability in that revenue stream, and they're facing things that are just variants everywhere they look, and especially because of COVID. And so I think this action will allow them to keep some things in place, put some additional things in place that will help these students. School is not like a factory. You can't just crank up machines and have it running, in a few hours. You have to keep the machine running. And so I just want to say thank you to those who have been involved in this and have made this possible, because I know schools certainly appreciate it.
Anyone else? All right, next question. And just a shout out to Nacogdoches ISD, who went above and beyond to locate their students, knocked on doors, made extra trips to homes, sent not only letters but actual people to find their children that we could not locate. So this is how I always tell Dr. Ellis I make his district look good by bragging on Nacogdoches. During the second special session that took place last year, Senator Taylor authored and passed Senate Bill 15, a virtual learning bill, with the help and sponsorship of many of you on this panel. Thank you. Could you tell us why this bill is important to public education accessibility as the state continues to respond to the pandemic? Senator Taylor?
Well, thank you. I would take it beyond just COVID. I've been pushing for technology, more technology in our classrooms for years, not as a replacement for teachers, but as an enhancement. And we had a number of districts who had kind of led in that issue and gotten out there. We'd also passed a bill 2 sessions ago, the E-rate program, using federal funds to make sure we had broadband on every campus across Texas. Thank goodness we did that, because when COVID hit, which no one was expecting, we went to an overnight from classroom instruction to all virtual. Now, a lot of people say, well, that virtual is terrible, we can't continue doing that. But the fact is, you're comparing, remember the TV show MASH? You're comparing a MASH unit to a well-designed and organized hospital. This thing was literally set up over spring break. We had kids go from face-to-face without devices to the next week they were giving you devices, teaching them how to use them and trying to go online. So don't take that as that's what virtual education looks like. Now, most of our students, probably 95%, did not do well in that environment. Not surprisingly, it wasn't a well-orchestrated plan, but just in general, most of our kids need to be in that classroom. We need that touch, that face-to-face with the teacher, those kind of things. There were a small percentage, probably 5% or less, 3 to 5%, who actually thrived in this environment. And my goal has always been, along with my other colleagues up here, is to make sure that every child in education has the opportunity to have the education that's best for them, that helps them to meet their potential and achieve the goals they have or should have for their lives. And so we want to keep virtual education for those kids who thrive, but we also want to keep it as an enhancement. Think about the child who's out sick for mononucleosis for 2 weeks. In the past, they would send packets home, but it wasn't quite the same. You could actually watch the classroom presentation home, or even the child who's in the class and didn't quite get it that day. They can go home and watch that class again with their parents or someone else to help them get that, so you don't fall behind on these concepts. Alternative discipline. We talked about the prison, pipeline to prison. You put a child in alternative discipline, they're out of the classroom, they fall behind, then you put them back in the classroom, guess what? It's a hopeless situation. Virtual education, which frankly, I'm sorry, the whole world is now using virtual everywhere else. So we need to have it in education. We need to make sure it's well designed. We did restrict it on this. It's only for 2 years, this bill, because we had a lot of schools who we felt like were pushing virtual education to the detriment of their students. They just wanted to keep doing that, but it wasn't working for those students. So we limited it to students who, one, had been in virtual education before, had done well in that environment, had a C or better, and did well on the STAR test. We did not want every student on this, but we did set up for 2 years because we have a commission meeting right now on virtual education to try to do a deep dive into this and find the best practices and the best way to do these things and make sure we can develop those and maybe have some pilot programs going forward. But we need to make sure that education in Texas is up to 21st century standards. And I'm not talking about putting kids in front of a screen all day, but it's a great enhancement tool. I'll just tell you real quick, a textbook to these kids growing up with iPhones and all that, you might as well be putting a scroll in front of them. And so, start reading here from right to left. I mean, it's crazy. Versus what they're used to the things you can see, remember the diagrams in biology, figure 1, 2, 3, and 4, you had to figure out what the difference was, what had happened. Now you click something that has the actual video of it happening. So it's just so much more instructive and so much deeper. And even the test can be done in such a manner that you don't just ask the question, they check yes or true or false and move on. True or false, okay, well, how about a little bit deeper? Did you really know that, or you just get lucky on the first guess and really get that depth of knowledge? Those are the things that we can develop in education and get these kids prepared for the 21st century beyond, because that's what they're living in.
Thank you.
Sorry, that went a little long there.
That's okay. You always do that.
Representative Shine?
I
Or-
think Mr. Bell was ready to go.
Bell, go right ahead.
Yeah,
Thank
he's-
you.
He's a house buster.
Well, thank you, and thanks for being in Nacogdoches. My family, my dad's family, actually grew up. He's a graduate of Mount Enterprise High School, and lived in Garrison. So I've been around East Texas a lot, and it's great to be back. And it's beautiful here. And thanks for having us. It's an honor to be here. Chairman Taylor, I appreciate his willingness to allow me to sponsor Senate Bill 15 in the House. I'd worked on this issue throughout the regular session in the 87th, and as he said, what we wanted to make sure is we limited this to districts that were getting this done, see or better, put the guardrails in place that a cap of 10%, a maximum of 10% of kiddos in a district could do this. And what we knew is we had spent $1 billion of taxpayer money in devices, hotspots, and the software to put this in place over the spring of 20. And then, as the senator said, it didn't work for every child. But for those that it did, we met those kids, and this is something that Senator Taylor says all the time. We got to meet the kids where they are, right, Senator? And so with devices, with that they have, whether it's cell phones, iPads, they're multitasking. That's the way they've grown up. I've got 5 grandkids. We look at these kiddos and how they work with these devices. We may be aliens in an electronic world, but our kids and grandkids certainly are not. But what we know is with that, people learn 3 different ways: audibly, visually, and kinesthetically. And so these virtual models allow that to occur. We said that an educator in that guardrail couldn't do both virtual and in the classroom at the same time, that they need to be dedicated to this process, and those that did so did well. The other thing this allows us to do, and we know that higher ed has been doing virtual education for well over a decade. I didn't go back to college till I was 48, and I did half of it online. And so they're making this work. And so with a hybrid model, of which we allowed to do with just a 2-year window here, we've opened up the door for students to go to school 3 days a week in a classroom, 2 days a week, possibly hybrid, dual credit classes. But it also opens up from a workforce development standpoint with the ability to have internships, apprentice programs. And as we look at the 60 by 30 program, which was a goal that we've set prior to me being in the legislature, this is going to move that ball down the field. And so I was proud to be a part of it. Appreciate you once again, Senator, Chairman, for allowing me to have a seat at that table. Thank you.
Great partner.
You bet.
Let me mention something here. I don't sit on the education committee, but I have 9 school districts in my district, and I engage with my superintendents on a weekly basis. From the mechanics of things, my colleague right here sits right across the aisle from me, and as my superintendents we had conversations about Senate Bill 15, they had some questions, and I believe I had one superintendent that had some real significant input that he wanted to make, and he called me on the floor of the House. And this is the mechanics of how things work. I walk across the aisle to where Representative Bell is, and I said, "You got time, Keith, to talk to my superintendent in Temple. He's got a couple of questions, a couple of things to input. Just hand him the cell phone, and they have a conversation. And in a number of occasions, this type of relationship and working relationship is where some things that come from you who are out there, the professionals out there, the superintendents, the principals, and the schools, are able to have a voice because you call your representative, and we're not all things to everybody. We kind of specialize in some areas that particularly, like a lot of the colleagues that I have up here do, and you take that input from the folks in your district and you get it to the right person to make sure that they have a discussion on it, and if it merits moving forward with it, they do. And I appreciated very much what Keith did for my superintendent in that case, because it definitely made them happy, and it made them feel part of the process, and that's important too.
Fantastic. Would anyone else like to share? Okay, next question. So House Bill 3, which was mentioned previously, was a sweeping and historic school finance bill that passed during the 86th legislature in 2019. During the 2021 legislative session, the legislature went back to make adjustments needed to improve school finance formulas and other provisions from House Bill 3 regarding the fast growth allotment and career and technical education. Can you tell us how these adjustments will better serve Texas students and families?
Everybody's staring at me.
Somebody-
Hugh, you want to take that one?
Oh, Dan, I as a Ways and Means member, I'm going to defer to you first.
Okay.
But when we want to get into property value studies, I'm ready to go.
All right.
I'll take a bite of it, then I'll certainly Chairman Dutton or Chairman Taylor or anybody else that served on the committee. Really, you know, when you pass a pretty large piece of legislation, as House Bill 3 was, I think it was in excess of 500 pages, you're going to have oops moments and not get it right.
But they weren't our fault.
Well, it was certainly not our fault. I'm going to blame TEA and everybody else that was involved beside us. But no, it was clearly our fault. It was kind of like, oh, man, you know. And so, but what we immediately knew was that, as just Representative Schein was pointing out, is that you know, the superintendents are the people that engage in this stuff, you know, tell you pretty quickly when you make a mistake, you know, and like one of the big things. So the two things that you touched on that I think were important is that when we talked about fast growth allotment and how it was calculated, what we recognized, and here's a prime example, is Klein Isd. I know the superintendent there gave me a call and said, Dan, you know, we grew by 1,500 students a year. Now, some of the districts out here in, you know, East Texas, you know, don't even have 1,500 kids, right? I mean, this is a district that grew by 1,500 kids, and they didn't qualify for the fast growth allotment. They're like, how is that possible? Like, we need, you know, a middle school and an elementary school to keep up with the growth. And what if you go back and look at it, it was because of the way that the formula was calculated. So a small school district, you know, that had, you know, 500 kids, ended up with, you know, 40 more kids, ended up with a huge fast growth allotment, but a district that has, you know, 50,000 kids, it grows by 1,500, gets nothing. That's not the way that it was supposed to be set. So we went back to the drawing board and worked with the Fast Growth Coalition and took their input. The CTE, which would probably be a big deal for districts out in this area, not small mid-sized districts, when we did that, we miscalculated and left off the ability to get their mid-size adjustment as well as getting the career and technical education. We made it kind of an either or, and that was never the intent of what we were trying to do. And so those were two big fixes. And I joked with Chairman Dutton about this because when we sat down and we talked about, you know, legislation that where we're going to carry, he says, no, go ahead and do it. And I said, you know, I think it's just going to be a small bill and we'll clean it up. I think it was like 90 pages, you know. So you know, that's a large bill in any case, but be able to do it. But the input that we got from like Representative VanDeaver and his districts and Representative Bell and others on this panel, right? You know, very important to get the feedback to fix something. And I'm not saying it's perfect, but we did do a lot of changes. And there's other components that I'll leave to the other members to talk about.
You know, Dan, Chairman Huberty was the chairman. That was my freshman session, HB3 in the 86th. You know, he's a humble guy from Humble, right? And so I will tell you that For us to do what we need to do for public education and to provide meaningful property tax reform, you had to fix school finance. And, and it was huge. And like I said, he's humble because the fast growth allotment actually occurred was we went to current year values. I represent Kaufman County. We grew 40% in the last decade. Every one of my school districts were in the top 25th quartile of the fastest growing districts in Texas. And so when you go to current year values rather than a lag, and we may have some superintendents and understand school finance, that's a significant drop in your revenue. And so I went to Dan and Chairman Huberty and said, Dan, this is going to disproportionately affect the community of which I live in and all these school districts. And that came out of that. And I appreciate you, Chairman, for helping not only my district but others. But, it was an unintended consequence that some of the districts, rural districts, maybe only grew 100 kids, actually put them in that top quartile. And I believe it was House Bill 1525 that fixed that problem. And I hope, and I won't put you on the spot, Representative VanDeaver, but it was he that worked on the CTE as well as the adjustments for that to fix that, because we disproportionately affected smaller rural districts. They lost money because they couldn't use both the mid and small schools adjustment and the CTE. So it was a great bill that fixed those two big unintended consequences for all districts.
Let me add something here. When I served in the legislature the first time, it was right after Edgewood versus Kirby. Everybody knows what happened after that with Robin Hood. And my last session back in the late 80s, early 90s was dealing with that, and the courts took over funding for public education. And what I will say here, House Bill 3 basically took public education out of the hands of the courts and put it in the hands of the legislature, and that's how monumental this legislation was.
And if I could just take a matter of personal privilege, I want to say House Bill 3 was perhaps the most revolutionary change in public education funding. And it's because of these two guys sitting beside me, Dan and Larry. And I just want to say thanks to them. But I want to point out that Texas is losing them. Larry's chosen not to run for election, and Dan has chosen not to run for election. That is a significant loss to this legislative process when it comes to education, to public education especially. And I just wanted to point that out because I don't want them to get too far away. I hope they'll stay around in some capacity. I know they'll both probably make more than $600 a month now. And so, but I want to say, I want you to join me in saying thanks to them, because we ought to give them a big hand. Thank you all. I just wanted to say that because it was, both of them have been near and dear to me, and always on the side of children in the state of Texas.
If I could, thank you, Harold, for that, and thank you. House Bill 3 was a huge commitment, but it wasn't just us two. We had the whole team rowing in the same direction. I think I heard some of that discussion on the panel before us. The Texas legislature is not Washington, D.C. We passed a school finance bill, which is one of the most complicated things you've ever dealt with, school finance, that you'll ever deal with. And we passed it unanimously in the House and the Senate. And it was transformative. We really have issues we have to deal with. But I just wanted to add, this bill we passed this last session, a lot of people say, okay, y'all made that huge commitment, are you going to keep it up? The biggest deal about passing this bill was we fulfilled our commitment, plus. We are, as a legislature, standing behind our public education system and striving to get the very best for every one of our kids. And I think that was a huge thing that the whole legislature did, and we should all take credit for that. Thanks to the voters who sent us up there to work on these projects, send the right kind of people up who are willing to work with each other and not fight all the time. But I think that was a big deal. Beyond the fixes, there were also things that happened between House Bill 3. You know, we had this great transformative thing, working to improve education, and then what happens? COVID. And we had to deal with a lot of that stuff. So a lot of that bill actually had to deal with catching up with learning loss, hold harmless agreements. So we spent, you know, and making sure career tech is out there as part of our main emphasis of our educational systems. Not everyone's going to four-year university. We wanted to keep that going forward, and it's working. But we need to make sure it worked. But we had hold harmless. We did technology reimbursements. It was a huge bill. I mean, we're talking about another couple $1 billion on top of the $11 billion we had done in this session before. But I think the biggest impact of that was we fulfilled and showed we are committed to keeping this going forward. So I'm just was proud to be a part of it. I had a great partner with Chairman Huberty, but all the members up here and the folks back in the legislature all played a good hand in this, and they were all willing to put aside some differences and work together for the benefit and the betterment of Texas.
Absolutely. Representative Raney?
Thank you. I'm not on pub ed, but I'm on higher ed, and there's an area that you've been talking about here today that is dear to my heart, and that's CTE training or workforce training or whatever you want to call it. We call it of different things, but to me, that's the most important thing that we can do. Not maybe the most important, but one of the most important things that we can do is continue to train people to do the jobs that need to be done. When I was first on higher ed, community colleges came and talked, and I was listening, and they said that 62% of the plumbers in Texas were over the age of 62. I don't believe that's changed very much. And as just residents have tried to get things done on your home, I bet you've had a difficult time finding somebody to come and do plumbing or electrical work. And I'm not talking about redoing your house. I'm talking about the minor things that you have to do when you own a home. We have to train people to do jobs. The people that are coming across the border right now, they're going to need some training at some point. We still have to train people to do jobs, and we need to make sure that that training is adequate. I'm a big proponent of what we have up at TSTC, and we pay those fund TSTC based on performance, not on just because somebody set the chair, but we pay them looking at what those students have done for the next 5 years after they graduate. I think it's a really good way to make sure that we have performance from our education systems, and I would like to see that continued and expanded.
Thank you. That's an excellent segue to the next question, which is, earlier this year, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board announced an updated state higher education strategic plan called Building a Talent Strong Texas. This new strategic plan focuses on the following three measurable data-driven goals: attainment of certificates and degrees so that at least 60% of Texans ages 25 to 64 have a post-secondary credential of value by 2030. Post-secondary credentials of value aligned with workforce demands that will raise incomes for individual Texans while reducing debt. Research, development, and innovation that drives discovery, improves lives, broadens education, and creates new jobs. How will these goals and the metrics tied to measuring these goals help policymakers make decisions to increase Texans' opportunities to succeed? Go right ahead. Jump right in.
Well, I will. I think that the goal of having 60% by the year 30 is wonderful. I hope we achieve it. We've got to spend more money on these activities in order to accomplish that goal, in my opinion. They have come up with something that I just learned about last session that has to do with badges rather than certificates, or maybe badges that would work your way toward a certificate. Very important. We need to have people go into maybe a 2 or 3 week class that'll get them started, get them in a starting job, and then they can take more classes at community college or wherever to continue their advancement. We also have a lot of things going on with workforce and workforce commission, and they have some funds out there that need to be utilized, and we need to take advantage of those locally to take the business that currently exists, and they can take their employees through these programs and increase their functionality. That's very, very important. These are things that are very, very important to me, and to see the economy of Texas continue to grow, they're going to have to take place.
Well, let me just say this. I think CTE is absolutely critical. The only question I have that I've been raising is whether or not every campus ought to have a CTE program, because what sense does it make to have a air conditioning program at this campus, and you got one at the next campus, and you got one at the next campus? I have wondered whether or not a regional concept to CTE programs where you have multiple, perhaps even multiple districts feeding into it or having access to it might not be a better idea, where you'll get a better program. It'll be less costly. But I'm not quite sure yet how to fund it, Larry. I don't know how we would do that, but it's something I think we ought to explore.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
We do have that sort of already with the community college system.
We do.
And we have, in our area, we have some
Right.
great community colleges.
Right.
And, we have a dual credit program that high school students are using to get college credit. But there also, we can start getting into what you're describing there. Have some of the technology things that kids can start doing in high school, and even try different things. We had this discussion in our last commission meeting. The idea that people get to see different industries and trades and actually try them out is a good idea. Because there may be something you think you want to do, and then you go do it like, I don't want to do this the rest of my life, and then you move on. But if you have an opportunity to experience different things like that, whether it's, just talking about industrial trades, which we have some great careers in my area, but welding, air conditioning, plumbing, let them try some of those things. Like we used to do just in high school shop, wood shop. But I think coordinating, and this is really kind of the change, I think, of public education in Texas. We've already gone K to 12, and now we're talking about K through 14. Go ahead and include our communities. We have some programs like PTAC and some of these other things, but they're actually 6-year programs where a kid starts in high school, and by the time they finish their 2 years in associate, they've got a career, associate's degree, and a job, because they've been interning and doing all these things all the way through there. So I think it's a matter of, for efficiency's sake, and actually better education process, we make it more moving into that K through 14. We have a community college finance commission that's meeting right now, working on through some of those issues, because community colleges have changed. I don't know if you want to get into that, but these are things that we have to do. We have to transform, and we can't keep using the model. Community college finance, kind of like school finance, is over 50 years old. And guess what? Things have changed in the last 50 years, even for community colleges, and the students they're dealing with. The reason we changed from 25 to 34, if you get 6% of that, but you still got a whole lot of people 35 to 64, because guess what? Those people need upskilling too. Those jobs have changed. So the community college is the best avenue for those people to come back in and get upskilled, get in a certification, get a badge in something that allows them to move in another field. That's where we need to be, and that's why we're looking at community college finance, to kind of add to that spectrum, K through 12, maybe K through 14, and kind of blend them a little bit more. Still independent, because they have their different roles to play, but working together, we can build better efficiencies and a better quality education for all of our people here in Texas.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I would like
agree.
to
Sorry.
one accolade I'd like to throw to Bryan School District. They have a wonderful new CTE center that takes in College Station. I think some folks from Burleson County and maybe in Robertson County also use it. The only concern that I have is they got a big piece of property. Looks like it's a lot of space, but they can't handle enough students to really make progress in that area. That's my opinion. The school district didn't come say, we need more space. I'm just saying that I think the idea of training people to do jobs is so important that we need to put a high emphasis on it.
And I'll just finish up with Senator Taylor and Representative Raney. You know, our governor put in a tri-agency where he put the Higher Educating Coordinator Board, Texas Workforce Commission, and the TEA, Texas Education Agency, together on a tri-agency to talk about these various issues and workforce development. And the alignment of that to do just what Chairman Taylor said, and that is to utilize taxpayer funds. We're already appropriating the money for public education as well as for community colleges and higher ed. And to get to that pre-K to 14 education is a reality. And you take that with the commissions that are meeting today on virtual education and on higher ed, which we're fixing to discuss, and now you're building a model to put those things together, concentrate on workforce development, do the virtual education or hybrid education through the virtual education to open the door to do these apprenticeships and these kiddos to leave high school. If they want to go to college, they may very well have 60 hours of it done by the time they get out of high school. There are students in my district that graduate Trinity Valley Community College with an associate's degree before they walk across the stage to get a high school diploma. We're already paying for that as taxpayers, and we can efficiently do this. Those students can go on to college with those 60 hours, or if they're in an apprenticeship program, or they're in an internship, that they can be an electrician or a plumber or an air conditioning a person. And if you see the inflationary pressures from the lack of artisans that exist in Texas today, that inflationary issue is going to end up affecting economic development. And we have a duty to make sure that we keep the Texas miracle alive. And I just commend my colleagues for putting these commissions in place, the dialogue that you're hearing here today. We're working on some issues that'll set the stage for Texas going forward, and I appreciate being a part of it.
Well, and I would hope that we would extend it so that it catches up with, for example, in Texas, we have between the ages of 18 and 25, we have almost 5 million people who don't have a high school diploma. That, in my sense, is a tragedy. Mm-hmm. And so somehow or another, we need to factor them into the equation, particularly when it comes to talking about equipping people with a trade, because we got to do something about that.
I'll just, yes, sir.
The 60 by 30, I think we've said that a couple of times, but I don't know if we tell everybody, 6% of people, and it was 18 to 25, now it's 18 to 64, having something beyond high school. The importance of that is 95% of the jobs today require something beyond high school. So if you haven't even graduated high school, you're in a world of hurt. But just getting a high school diploma today does not get you in a lot of jobs. In fact, their unemployment rate is like, double. But people have something beyond high school. So that's why you hear this emphasis on getting something beyond high school, because that's what the job market of today requires. And these are skilled jobs. You know, there's not a whole lot of just totally unskilled. Today, almost every job requires some skills, especially if it's going to pay well. By 20. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we have 8 years, and we were making progress, and then COVID hit, and we've got a little dip. So, and here, once again, the community college, the importance of community college, and when I talked about accelerated education, here's a statistic we heard at the beginning of the session from our Commissioner of Education. This is going to be shocking to you. But every year, about 28 to 30% of our students grade below grade level. And in the past, we put them in remediation programs of some sort. Mm-hmm. After 3 years, 2% of those kids got caught up. So when you heard the urgency, we've got to do something about getting accelerated education, our kids falling behind. You can't have 2% of your 20%, 28% falling out of the program pretty much. 2% actually move on, the rest of them are stopped. 2 or 3 years being behind, you know what those look like? They look like dropouts. So that's why you see such urgency on these things we're talking about. We have some real issues, and we had some pushback from some people saying about the accelerated learning is too much. We didn't give them enough money, but we also know the feds gave $16 billion, but we won't go there. But these are important things to get our workforce, our state. Here's the other, and I think I told you this 4 years ago, and here's what kind of got me inspired on this. We've not done a good job for our low-income students for years, historically. Those are the kids who have fallen behind. Well, guess what? That demographic is now 60% of our student body. And it's also the fastest growing demographic. So you can see the curve is not going the right direction. If you don't bend that, Texas will not be the state that it is today. And that's why you had the urgency behind House Bill 3, why you see the community college finance. I would rather be nowhere else but Texas to face a challenge like this, because this is what Texas does. We meet a challenge, we roll our sleeves up. What do we got to do? We get after it. But we need to support the people behind us to make sure we push these things forward and get them done, because we have to for the future of this great state. And I think we're going to get it done.
Thank you. I just one final plug for Nacogdoches ISD, who has a phenomenal CTE program. There's Nacogdoches. Will you wave, everybody? These are my people right there. Yes, Nacogdoches ISD. I am so proud of the work that Nacogdoches ISD does, and I'm so proud of them. Any final comments, gentlemen, before we go?
I have one, and it's sort of the canary in the mine. We have statewide, I was taking a look at third grade reading scores. Only 30% of our children are reading on grade level in third grade. That's a tragedy. I also looked at Nacogdoches ISD too, and it's about 30% also. And the problem with that is this, is that between pre-K and third grade, you typically learn to read. And after that, you read to learn. And if you never ever get to where you learn to read, you never ever get to where you read to learn. That is a crisis that's brewing, and we've got to do something that changes that whole dynamic so that we get every third grader with the capability of reading. And that's my comment, and I think that we just got to do it.
Thank you. Anyone else like to make a final comment? No.
If it means Travis doesn't come back up here, I'll say something.
Okay. He's going to come tell another story.
But Chairman Dutton is exactly correct, and that's why we did things in House Bill 3 like funding pre-K for our low-income students, because some students are showing up in first grade already reading because their parents have been working with reading books and all. Some kids are showing up don't even know the letters. So that's the importance of pre-K1, and so there were studies showing us the importance of that early childhood education on a young child's brain and their brain development. That's why you saw the state put that emphasis towards pre-K. We're trying to address those issues, but once again, here comes COVID right in the middle of our instituting those programs. But we are still moving forward in those programs, and the funding is there to do it, to make sure we get these kids a better head start before they get to school.
Well, we welcome you back to Nacogdoches, and a year from now, you will see our premier pre-K center for our children of Nacogdoches ISD. Very proud of that as well.
Great.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. If we could all stand up here and get our picture, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.